guys, welcome to our last video in our series, Coping Through COVID. Thank you so much to the Rock Counseling Group for sponsoring this series. So this last video is called Supporting Each Other. So take it away, John.
Gotta support each other. That's
End
it.
of video.
End of video. No. I wanted to talk a little bit about just, the social aspect of this, because you could argue one of the biggest things this has affected is, the way that we get together with each other and the social aspect of things.
Yeah.
So, we'll talk about supporting each other in that way. And staying connected is such a corny way of saying it. It's very cliche, but the whole connection thing, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
But I also want to talk, too, about how we communicate, because there's a lot to communicate about. And so I'll talk about that for nurses and frontline workers, just maybe a little bit on the unit, but as well as, life in general. So starting off, I don't know that I need to say a ton more about the social connection aspect of it.
I think one thing I do want to add is to not forsake it.
Absolutely.
I think that we get so, prioritizing with this kind of tunnel vision perspective that the only thing that matters is no or less COVID cases and deaths, and doing all we can to regulate that very specific thing, that we forget all these, other very important things. And that
and you bring up a good point, that the forsaking it part is the big thing that I would want to throw out there. In the midst of being concerned about this virus, it's also important that we stay concerned about other things at the same time. Yeah. And that one of those is not forsaking that. Something I have heard people say is usually it's just kind of a figure of speech, but it's like, well, right now we can't do anything, or because I can't see people. And the thing I just want to remind people of is we can focus on all the things that we quote unquote can't do, but let's refocus to what can we do? What are the ways that we can be around each other? And especially with where we are, you can speak more to this, but where we are at in the process, again, it goes back to looking at the evidence and, what does the evidence say about what's safe and what's not? And then obviously, depending on where you live, there's certain laws or ordinances. Thank you. I was looking for the right word.
Well, and I think that going back to knowing your numbers, and as of today that we record this, mid-October, the CDC has released, their fatality ratios, and they're nothing like we thought they were going to be months and months ago. I mean, if you are a young person, generally healthy, there's over a 99% chance that if you do acquire this pathogen, that your body is going to handle it just fine. And it's important that that's a piece of the puzzle too, that we're utilizing that evidence to help guide our decision making. And also so that's the CDC's big picture one, but also looking locally. Are you in an area that has low health, beds and a high elderly population, or high, high at-risk population? Or our community is a little unique in that we're testing a lot more. We've got a ton of resources. We've had low numbers. So it's very important to understand what's going on with your own area to inform those decisions.
Absolutely. And I'm going a little out of order here, but, I think it makes sense to put this here. It's important to also look at, when we talk about supporting each other, not just getting together to have fun. There were a lot of ways that we socially supported our communities that maybe we've retreated from. And it's important to remember, again, in addition with concern about a virus, there's concern about our communities, and obviously academics has been a big topic, but a lot of families who, whether it's lower income or just honestly unhealthy family dynamics, where we have to keep into consideration. At the same time that it's important to consider this virus, we still need to find ways to support our communities, to make sure that we're, as much as possible, providing those opportunities to each other of, hey, kids can come out and we can gather here in whatever safe way we can make it happen. For families, we can have these things be available in whatever safe ways. So we're bringing it, we're getting a little bit to the end of this video, but that's something to throw in there is, I've seen people outside, even early on, 6 feet apart, sitting in lawn chairs. But I think we underestimate the importance of actual physical and social connection, but then also on a larger scale, looking at our communities and taking into account the mental and emotional health of people at the same time that we take into account physical health.
Because we can actually do harm if we're not conscientious of that at all.
Yeah. So nurses, frontline workers, that does apply to y'all. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's applicable to y'all at work, but even going home and looking at your families, your communities, your neighborhoods, where it's like, hey, it's really healthy, especially as a frontline worker, to stay connected to people. Mm-hmm. So wherever that can be facilitated, we can't ignore that part.
And not like, I want to make sure, too, if you're isolating or having to quarantine, ensuring it truly is necessary to do it and not thinking that quarantining is this harmless thing that you do. You should only do that when it's absolutely necessary and indicated, because that itself does damage to individuals, mental and emotional, that are very important to be aware of.
Right. Now, what I wanted to talk about for nurses and frontline workers, number one, at work and on the unit. These are general. I don't know that, I'm sure a lot of units are navigating this thing really well. But again, this goes back to in the midst of very stressful situations, in the midst of maybe anxiety being high, nurses feeling overwhelmed with caseloads or what's being asked of them. Making sure that you just kind of foster a culture on your unit of checking in with each other. Hey, how you doing? And again, we're not looking to take on more than we can, but I think if everybody on there is saying, how can we work together as a team? I'm checking in with you. Hey, how you feeling? How you doing? Are you overwhelmed? And again, one thing I saw in terms of nurse responses was, I think it was supervisor or two, like, I do feel bad because, or like higher ups in administration, like, how do I support? I'm not there on the front lines, and they are. Those are great opportunities for supervisors, administration, or higher ups to find ways to go and communicate, to touch base, ask what you need. This to me goes back to athletics and like creating good team chemistry. And so much of that is just the way you talk to each other, the way that you check in with each other. Again, I'm sure so many units are doing a great job of that, but some of what that does is it requires you to get out of your own brain.
Yeah, and see how someone
else
else
out to other people.
Do it, yeah.
So there's a sheet that I really like called, just talks about building happiness and, from the standpoint of psychology, ways to build happiness in life. And I think there's two. One of them talks about social aspect, but the other says basically kind of considering others, getting your eyes off yourself in your situation all the time. Now, of course, nurses are paying attention to their patients so much. Of course. But looking at each other and saying, hey, how are you doing? Tough one for me, too.
Well, I got a curveball for you, though.
Oh, boy.
So let's say we're trying to do that. But then we end up connecting with someone and talking to them and asking how they're doing, and they're saying things that, all right, so elephant in the room, this has become much more than a virus.
Right.
And they're coming from maybe a super not cool place. Maybe you're having this really tough time and they're saying this is a hoax. Of course, I would be hard pressed to believe a nurse on a unit would say something like that. But there's people who are in very different places,
and different viewpoints and opinions.
Yeah,
and the way that you navigate that. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to have different viewpoints. The way you communicate with each other about it, and the way you consider before you just go off, just kind of saying whatever you think. The way you consider that is important. I cut you off, but I just took it from there.
No, I think that it's like I wonder if it's hard to reach out to somebody and say, how are you doing? And then you kind of get that response of like, we should be doing this, or this is stupid, or this is why aren't people doing more of this? Both sides of it.
Right.
It's hard, but I wonder if the best way to like handle that is to refocus it on that person and say, well, okay, yeah, that's going on, but how are you doing? Is that like, how would you navigate
and
that?
I would imagine on a unit, it's important as you're at work to maybe recognize if that's the setting for those kind of conversations, expressions versus like when I say, hey, how you doing? It's kind of how you doing today as we're going through this day and your shift. And those bigger conversations, if that were to come up, that's a tough one. I think being able to stop, and anytime you communicate about difficult issues, first step, like I always say, is check in with yourself. Check in if what's happening in you emotionally. Am I frustrated about what this person's saying? Am I...
To regulate that amygdala.
Regulate your emotions. And then, empathy is always a positive thing. Doesn't mean you have to agree. But you ask them how they're doing. They're frustrated. There's a lot going on. Sometimes being able to say, like, I get you're upset today, or I can see you're frustrated. If you want to have that conversation, I would imagine in the middle of a shift, it may not be the best time.
That's how it happens. I mean, to be honest, you ask some small question and you get this big response, but you only have a moment, or it's very subtle. Subtly not cool. Those are probably the more common ones.
Some good phrases in terms of communicating about those things. Again, I'm going to go back to the, always acknowledging what you've heard, reflecting back what they've said, oh, I hear you saying this, or okay, you feel frustrated because you feel like this isn't happening the right way.
Yeah.
And then, I feel because this, anytime you can use that I when you're expressing yourself, so it's owning your thoughts, your emotions, instead of saying, well, these people and you and kind of that accusatory stuff I just think it cuts ears off pretty quick.
It does.
The other thing too is, I think the have you considered or what are your thoughts on, so that it kind of just continues the conversation, but it's inviting that person versus saying, oh, that's ridiculous, here's my viewpoint.
Or getting all like,
but to be honest, I didn't know that happened on units, like in the middle of shifts, but I guess I could see, like, if people are frustrated, you just kind of vent something out real quick.
Well, I think that stuff will happen just in normal conversation. I mean, I was working at the bedside with the last political election, right? So you have people making all these little comments, assuming you agree with whatever side they agree with. And I'm, and we're in an election time now too. And it's like, that makes it very tense. And people make little comments, and it is frustrating when people assume you believe what they do because what they believe is so obvious to be right. And I think that applies with this as well. And it's hard when someone believes so passionately that their thing is right.
Right.
It's just difficult to be around them if they're not being considerate of other people who might completely disagree.
It could go back to boundaries, but another thing that I encourage, and there's actually some information on this in terms of how to have healthy interactions. After you kind of identify, like, all right, here's what I just heard, I'm processing it. I need to identify how I feel and take a deep breath. Sometimes asking the question, okay, well, what's my goal in this interaction? Or what's the goal of this interaction? And this relates to this topic, but really any topic is, what's the goal of this? What do I want to get out of this, or what do we want to get out of this? And staying focused on that. Being able to try to stay focused on facts, not feelings, in the midst of those interactions. But I think ultimately, if we're talking about on a large scale supporting each other, when this issue, even amongst nurses on a unit, when there's disagreement, when there's conflict, if we want to be able to navigate it and actually move forward in a healthy way, people have to be willing to emotionally regulate themselves and actually be willing to have a conversation.
Yeah. And
listen to each other, and disagree, but not fight.
It's hard to do that when you're the one being conscientious about it. I don't feel like other people are putting in that much effort to be objective and caring, I guess.
That does happen. I go back to, so what's the goal of the interaction for me?
What can I?
What's my goal in this interaction? And like you said, where can I take control? Where do I just need to let it go? And there might be times where it's like, I have decided I don't want to have this conversation, or it's not going to go anywhere. So, I can be assertive and saying, appreciate where you're coming from. I disagree, but I'm just going to kind of go on about my work, go on about my day, and not to chat about it right now,
and not take it personally. I think that's the challenge. But it's very helpful when you can do that.
That's all individual emotional regulation. Now, I think, again, at work, being able to support each other, check in, I still think that culture, I don't want to have that get lost in this conversation. For nurses, supervisors, this is an important time to be more of a team and checking in with each other in terms of how you're going about the day. And then outside of it, being able to practice empathy without getting lost in another person's experience or their opinion, being able to perspective take.
I think that's important because this impacts everybody so differently. Because let's say, we know this virus, people who have of various ethnicities, particularly minorities, don't do nearly as well as others. So it would be if you have, other African American nurses on your unit, and the majority of people on your unit who have passed away look like they do. That's really hard.
Yeah. I'm glad you bring that up. Because when we're supporting each other and when we're communicating about it, being aware of various groups of people and how it's impacting them, and that could include coworkers, pregnant women, and how it impacts them, different ethnic groups or racial groups, as well as socioeconomic status and where people live. There's just so much that goes into this issue. And so being able to be aware of those things, hear other people out. I heard somebody say the other day, like, sometimes you can tell how an interaction is going to go by if a person reacts quickly with, a lot of defensiveness and they just truly don't want to have a conversation.
Paying attention to that kind of stuff to see how they're responding. And also, I think one thing that I know I've been guilty of too is I see this person in a short interaction and I just think I've got it all figured out of them being upset about this or not upset or they don't care about this, when in reality, like, I don't know that she's 4 months pregnant or just found out she's pregnant and is terrified, and she's working with COVID patients but doesn't want to tell anyone because she's so early. We are almost always know such a little piece of what's going on in their life and their brain. So to assume that we know exactly why they're acting a certain way, and even in normal life, without this in there.
The from the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek first to understand and then to be understood. And obviously the saying about be slow to speak, quick to listen. I think if all of us kind of owned practicing that and seeking to be that way as we communicate about these issues. Again, it doesn't mean we can't disagree. Disagreement, challenging each other's perspectives, that's healthy. It's good. But we got to be able to get to the point where we can have that. And if we're not able to communicate well, then we just can't have it because it's just going to turn into fighting. Because
if your only goal, going back to that, is to express your opinion or maybe being able to talk about it in a certain way releases negative emotions for you and fits a need for you. And we're looking for that, and we want to say it to anyone who will listen. And we don't really care what the other person has to say. It doesn't matter to us because we're consciously just trying to get our stuff out.
I got my opinion out. I got it out to the masses, and now I feel good.
It's meeting a need for yourself, and then it's at the expense of other people, because I have observed that behavior in many people and in myself too. And how you have all this you want to say, but does that person really need to hear it, or is it really so that you can dispel some negative emotions?
So I think all of that falls under, number one, we kind of start with just in general supporting each other and staying connected with people. But then we get into, again, the elephant in the room, like you said, of this thing has turned into a really divisive thing. A lot of disagreement, even become political in a lot of ways. And we have to just know, again, as nurses, frontline workers, and then just also as people, how to communicate, how to support each other even when we disagree.
So this is the last video. Can you give us your highlight reel, John? Of all 4 videos, give us a little, summary, pow.
So really went with that theme of control. And so the first video, damage control, all about, nurses, frontline workers, where's the bleeding and where can we stop it by just setting up boundaries? Because again, those responses we saw, there's so many people who are really struggling. So where can you set up boundaries professionally and throughout your workday, socially and with your loved ones, and then personally, what you allow into your mind, what you're inundated with as you go through your day. Next two videos, we talk about taking control and surrendering control. This is all about how you deal with, really the general word stress of everything that's going on, all the way from coping skills and rituals and routines to thought processes and how you actually bring your brain into the picture versus just emotion to evaluate anxiety and evaluate, and interpret what's going on in front of you. And then when to let go of those things, when to radically accept, here's what's going on, it's out of my control. I can breathe and let those worries go and refocus on my values and what I can control. And I want to pause real quick just to throw out, there are times as we talk about the anxiety and the stress, if we're talking like serious impact, there are times where I'm sure nurses and these frontline workers maybe start to have nightmares.
I've had people reach out to say that, or that they've had a colleague pass away and they're having a real tough time processing it. I use that word ruminating. You just feel like you're on a thought loop all day and it's distracting you. And you're breathing, maybe even anxiety and panic attacks, seeking to just avoid any reminders of what you're experiencing at work and the stress of it because you just can't handle it. I mean, these are all signs of, maybe some just real mental health difficulties as a result of what you're going through. That can span from, just kind of regular anxiety, but adjustment disorder all the way to, there can be PTSD. Absolutely.
From a lot of what's happening here. So I just think it's important that you recognize those times where, okay, maybe I need to reach out and see a counselor, talk with somebody about these things I'm experiencing. So that's a little thing just to throw in there after those. In the last video, how do we support each other, both on the unit and organizationally, but then opening that up to just as people, how do we communicate through this? How do we stay connected and not out of fear, out of anxiety, isolate unnecessarily? Yeah. So
not causing unnecessary trauma to ourselves. I think that's so important.
Yep.
Mitigating that. Because it's not just about mitigating the risk of that virus and acquiring it, but it's also about mitigating all these other risks.
Right. There's some inevitable, unavoidable pain and suffering associated with this time. The way that we respond to it and the way that we support each other, we can either increase our suffering actually by handling it and avoiding it in unhealthy ways versus handling it well and keeping it just to that core pain that is going to be there.
What a wonderful way to end this video series. Thank you so much to John and all of his expertise in helping us chat through some really important concepts that I think can be incredibly fruitful if we kind of start to implement those. So this is a lot of great info. The important thing is you start applying this stuff in your day-to-day. I'm elated. That's wonderful. Know that this is all stuff that's a practice. It is not something that you either do right every single time or you do wrong and it's not worth doing. Important to give yourself a lot of grace throughout this period of time. And as you're kind of processing these really, for a lot of people, traumatizing periods of time and trying to cope with that with the least amount of collateral damage as possible. So we just thank you guys so much for watching and engaging. We'd love to thank the Rock Counseling Group for sponsoring this video series. If you are one of those people who, hey, I really actually am having some of these signs that John was talking about, and you are looking for telehealth, we do have a link for getting set up at the Rock where you can do telehealth. And if you're locally in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, that's also where their offices are located. So thank you guys so much for your time and your engagement.